one of the dangers, one of the things that happens when a kid leaves yeshiva, and it's normal to a certain extent, that they perhaps in yeshiva felt so excited and passionate and everything was new, and then they kind of just chug ahead, and that's normal. And to a certain extent, you're on cruise control, and you're moving, and that's good. But you have to always be pushing yourself. Rabbi Nachman always talks about this idea about he would start. In Sichas Sarani talks about how he would start mechodash, from new, every single day, multiple times a day. And when you read it, you're like, well, what was he doing every day that he had to fall and kept on getting himself up? But it's this mahalach of always pushing yourself passionately to new heights and be excited. Don't just go on autopilots.
Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Be'in podcast. This evening, I had the pleasure of spending some time with Rabbi Glanz, aka Rebbe Glandz from Yeshivat Mevaseret. Rabbi Glanz has been at the yeshiva for approximately 15 years and is also one of the founding Rebbeim of the Lavi Kollel in the summers. We touched on today the topic of a kesher with Rebbe and so many different facets and angles of where the kesher comes from, and just really good advice for people, no matter what age you are in life, about having a Rebbe in your life. So without further ado, I'm super excited for you guys to listen to what we spoke about. And before I get to this episode, I have to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video, and that is Noble Custom Suits. You'll hear about them throughout the episode. Without further ado, it's time to listen to my episode with Rabbi Glanz. Welcome to the Israel Gap Year Be'in podcast. I'm your host, Avi Proctor, and in each episode, we get Be'in in depth into the remarkable lives of individuals in Israel who dedicate themselves to inspiring the next generation of Klal Yisrael. Welcome, Rev Glandz, or people call you Rebby Glandz for the millions of viewers that have seen your famous videos on YouTube. I just want to, first of all, thank you for taking the time to come join me right now.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
Okay, awesome. So you've been working in Mevaseret for many, many years, and a lot of the people that are listening to this know you from whether it's the famous I Need a Rebbe video and many different places, and also probably a lot of alumni from Mevaseret are hopefully listening to this. With that being said, I want to get a little bit of a better understanding maybe of how you got to who you are today. People know you as Rebbe Glandz, and there's a story behind that. So kind of take me through your background, where you grew up, and how we got here today.
Yeah. So no, I definitely was not born Rebbe Glandz. That's for sure. I think that my story to how I got to where I am today is quite a colorful one. I grew up in a modern Orthodox community in Staten Island. I grew up under Rabbi Marcus in the Young Israel of Staten Island. And I went to all the normal Staten Island schools as a kid. But I would say that really my journey began was in high school. In high school, I very much, I would say, rebelled. I was not very interested and connected to Judaism. I also didn't connect to many of my Rebbeim. Not that they were bad, but I wasn't in the right place. And I think that for me, I was very disenchanted and did not think actually I was heading in the direction of Frumkeit and Yiddishkeit. And I actually did not go to Israel for my gap year. I did not do that.
Where'd you go?
I went straight to Queens College. And I was not planning on going to Israel. And, they say a man plans and God laughs. So Hashem sent me some very important, shluchim in my life that sort of made me realize that I had made a mistake. There was an older influence who was a year older than me. His name is actually very well known, Rabbi Josh Ginniger, who looked out for me. And when he got back from Israel and started to, I would say even be makar of me a little bit. And I started to realize that maybe I had made a mistake. And I had met a few new Rebbeim along the way who really guided me and made me realize that, that there is something here and that I can connect to this. And I think that stark shift over those years that ended up bringing me to Eretz Yisrael. And then I had amazing, fabulous Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael. I went to Or Yerushalayim and had some fabulous Rebbeim there. And then continued to have unbelievable influences. And I saw the difference between, having a Rebbe that inspired versus not being inspired originally really made all the difference to me. And so that, I think, played a major role into what made me want to kind of do the same for others.
So, kind of going the path of not going to Eretz Yisrael and then going to yeshiva, did you ever think to yourself when you were an OJ of like, I want to become a Rebbe, this is the path I want to do? Or was it like, what was that process like from there to how do you end up living in Mevaseret and becoming so part of the yeshiva?
So that's a fascinating story. I actually started off when I was in yeshiva. So naturally, like most kids who take to learning and take to yeshiva, I started taking to learning. And I also realized in yeshiva that I had a knack for teaching. I realized that because I used to give chaburas and things like that, and I saw that I was able to speak well and I was able to inspire. I mean, the truth of the matter is I knew that even in high school, but I didn't use that to inspire people in Torah. I used that to be whatever I was trying to be in high school. And I always knew I had a koch to explain and to teach and to inspire in whatever way I was looking to inspire. And so when I left Eretz Yisrael, I knew that I had to go into teaching in some capacity in my life. I did not think I wanted to do that necessarily as a living, but I knew I wanted to teach. I actually was going back and forth as to whether I wanted to go into teaching or into finance. And that's where I was at a major tug of war. And I think my good friends they knew me and they're like, how could you not? Like, it's so obvious, like you need to go into teaching. Like that's your talent, that's your strength. But like, I kind of resisted doing that as a job, like as a living. Also, both my parents are teachers. So, I mean.
High school teachers?
No, my father started off as an elementary school teacher, then ended up becoming a professor and ended up teaching in YU for a bunch of years, running a master's program there. Now he runs the education Michlala master's program as well here. So my parents are teachers, and I'm naturally a teacher. But I had a major interest in finance, and I went back and forth for years. I dabbled in teaching in Landers, and then eventually when Landers first started, and then eventually in OJ. I actually went to OJ for a year to teach, which was a fun thing to do considering I was an alum. And but I went back and forth, and finally, I think it was in when I was really offered the job in Mevaseret that I realized that's something I wanted to give a real try. I've been there ever since.
So, in terms of like the age, at what point you were in your life, when you were teaching at Landers, and then when you came to Eretz Yisrael, how old were you at that time? Were you married or not? And kind of what happened from there?
Yeah. So when I was in Landers. So I got married when I was in Landers. I was Av Bayit in Landers. I was learning in the Kollel, and then I was Av Bayit in Landers. I got married at 23 in Landers. And when we were there, I stayed there for a few more years, and we made Aliyah when I was 26. We made Aliyah. I was married and I had a child, and made Aliyah 26, 27. And as I said, I taught in Eretz Yisrael for 1 year. And then I went back to Kollel. I was learning in Kollel till about 4, and I was working in finance from 4 till about 11. And that's kind of what I did there.
You were living in Eretz Yisrael at the time, right?
I was living in Eretz Yisrael at the time. Yeah.
Where did you always start in Mevaseret, or where do you start off?
No, so I started off in I made Aliyah, let's say, in 2005. I made Aliyah. I lived in Telstone for about 3 years, and then we ended up. It's a fascinating story. How it's a long story, and
can we hear a little bit of it?
A little bit of it is that very, very bekitzer. We tried buying an apartment in Beit Shemesh. It did not work. Without going into too much detail, and we were kind of stranded. And for years, we had wanted the opportunity to spend time in Tzfat, and we looked at that as an opportunity, and we actually ended up living in Tzfat for a year, which was a dream of a year. It was an amazing year, a real year of, I think I always say that for me, living in Tzfat for that year was equivalent in a different way to the growth I experienced in Shana Aleph and Shana Bet, because there was another side of me that came out in that year. It was like a side of where I developed more. I think in my years in Israel, I developed more in terms of learning. But there's a certain like spiritual side that, and like a little bit of a sort of a passionate, a little out of the box, colorful, I don't know what you want to call it, side of me, the more emotional side of me, spiritual side of me that really developed in that year. And so that's what I did for that year. And I was pretty convinced that I was going to stay in Tzfat. I mean, we were really happy there, my wife and I. We loved it. My kids were young, and we thought maybe we'll stick it out. And a good friend of mine, Rav Mordechai Berg, who had just come on to Mevaseret trying to like restart and revamp the yeshiva and try to like rebuild it. He came to me and asked me if I would come to Mevaseret, and I refused. Like initially refused.
Wow.
And I ended up going to Rebbe David Abuchatzera actually, and asked him, who's the grandson of the Baba Sali, and asked him a shaila, and he sent me. He's like, you got to go.
So I feel like for most people that go, let's say to Israel for the year, they have that one magical Shabbos in Tzfat. They're like, this place is epic, but nobody knows somebody that either lives there or what it's like to live. So kind of give me a little bit of like a Pesach into what it's like living in Tzfat. Like what is that experience like?
So, I had an unusual situation because I wasn't a Tzfati, and I didn't come to Tzfat like as a person who loved Tzfat. Like, it was very much an experience and a growth experience for me connecting to Tzfat. So I think the reason why I can help people connect to Tzfat so much is because, so to speak, I'm not a Tzfati b'makor. I'm not a Tzfati in my roots. But like, because I was not, and I connected to it so much, so connected to the Kivrei Tzadikim, connected to the community, connected to the vibe over there. Because of that, I think I have an easier time relating to, to guys when they come in and they look at it the same way I did, and they're like, what is this place? Like, this place is like, weird, and like weird vibes, and like everything's kind of like broken down. And so I kind of bring them through it, and not only bring out the history, but bring out the connection to the place. And, when we have Shabbatonim and things like that, I really try to give them the feel, not only for the history, but for the Kedusha of the place. And I do different things throughout the Shabbos in order to try to bring that out.
Wow. So, I was thinking before you came here that there's not that many people that I know that live, I guess you could say, around Yeshivat Mevaseret. I know they have a community based on campus and whatnot. And a common thing that at least I've seen with a lot of different teachers is that sometimes the yeshiva or the seminary, or wherever they're working in Eretz Yisrael, becomes their community. So for yourself, moving to a place like Mevaseret, what was that like, where there's probably, as far as I know, outside of the yeshiva walls, there's probably no Anglo community. There's probably not a chevra to call. So what was that decision like for you? Was it hard? And then how did the community essentially become the yeshiva for you?
So it really goes back to when I was in Landers. So at the time I was out by it. So as my wife and I, as Avanim Bayit, we lived on campus. And I think that in my formative years in that capacity in chinuch, I really saw the power of being on campus and connected to the guys near campus, being involved in the Shabbatot, as opposed to just coming in, teaching, and leaving, which, again, being a Rebbe and being Machanech and teaching, and then kind of having your separate life in your community is the reality for most Rebbeim, and probably there's good reason for it, and it should be. But for me, I really, experienced, both my wife and I really experienced the opportunity, the whole different level of chinuch a person could do when they're sort of in the trenches. And I had that experience to draw from in Landers, and I saw I was something I was good at, and I was able to connect to the guys in that way outside of formal teaching. And I think it only helped me because I was able to foster the connections to be able to teach more effectively and to influence more effectively. Naturally, when I was first offered the job in Mevaseret by Rev Berg was, even though he's only a few years younger than me, Rev Berg was in the dormitory when I was Avbayit. So he remembered me from those days, and he knows what I did over there, and he wanted me to do, not as Avbayit, but he wanted me to do that kind of, and the Rosh Yeshiva, and they wanted me to do that kind of thing in Mevaseret. So initially when I came to Mevaseret, I came with a 5-year plan. Like the 5-year plan was we signed on a house. We rented this house with a huge living room, and that's all I was looking for. Like a house with a huge living room so it could host tishes on Friday night. So we can host a ton. And that's really what we did. And for many years we hosted tishes. And so 2 things happened over time. Number 1 is I eventually had to move into a smaller place. Right. And number 2, the yeshiva got really, really big. So I no longer host tishes in that way, but I still do live on campus even today. And it comes with its challenges, for sure. Not living in, I would say, the type of community that I envisioned. But Mevaseret's also a very special place. And I think that we gained a lot being in a place that is, not, I don't know how to say this, but like not your typical American, kind of place. It's kind of like you really get a real taste of Israel. And I think that in some ways, it was challenging. In some ways we benefited, like anything.
What was the most amount of kids you've ever packed into your living room for a tish?
I know we came pretty close to hitting 200. We came pretty close because remember, it's not kids. It's fun. Let's say Mevaseret at that time had 140. Let's just say in those times, 140, and now we're up over 200, Kanai Nahara, but like we're at 140 or so. But then there's the families that came, and then, the kids would come, and like sometimes, and we don't even have, sometimes our next door neighbors would come in. Initially when we came to Mevaseret, they did not love us because we were the ones making tons of noise Friday night, and they didn't love that. But eventually they really warmed up to us. And I think we packed, I don't know how. It was like, we packed like close to 200 people in that living room.
I can't imagine to think right now, other than what it's like for your family and for your Rebbe's, and specifically of like, how do you balance that of like, I live next to Yeshiva, I'm always trying to have guys over, but then like, you want to have family time, you don't want to make it too hard for the Rebbe's, and like, how do you balance that? What do you do?
Yeah. So over the years, we've gotten better at that. I'll be honest with you. In the beginning, I did not have a boundary. Like, I didn't know how to do that. Like, I'm just going to be honest. I did not know how to do that. Like, I just always was hosting and always wanted to have people over. And we wanted to. Like, I think both of us, we wanted to. But there came a point where we realized, like, we have to create some boundaries, healthy boundaries. And I think the healthy boundary that we essentially created, one happened, which was, again, I'm not happy about this, but, we had to stop the tishes eventually. The yeshiva got too big, and as I said, we eventually moved, and the house that we moved to has a relatively normal living room now. But I think also we started to implement certain things, like, for example, instead of having guys all Shabbos, because we live on campus, we use that to our advantage. We would have guys Friday night, and then Shabbos day kind of have with my family. So we're able to find balance over time, but I wouldn't trade in the opportunity that I have to always be near the yeshiva, and with the yeshiva, it's a very, very unique opportunity. And those tishes in those early years, they just put a smile on my face. They were just so special, and I think they made my family. I think I look at my older kids now, and they think back to those days, and they feel blessed that they were able to be part of such a thing.
Wow. How many years, by the way, were you living, or have you been living in Mevaseret for?
So I've been living in Mevaseret for 15 years. We moved in 2009 from Tzfat. We moved to Mevaseret, and in that particular house, we lived till COVID. In COVID, the owner of the house, we were renting. We were always renting year by year because every year we were leaving. But like, we kept on staying. And then during COVID, the owner of the house had a daughter who lost her job and needed a place to live. So he, like, last minute kicked us out of our house. And so we ended up, Baruch Hashem, we ended up being zoche to move to another place, which we're very, very happy in, a little bit of a different part of Mevaseret, still walking distance from the yeshiva. But we now live in another place.
So after 15 years in the same place, around the same yeshiva with new guys coming in every single year and having, the same tissues. And like, there's a certain pattern that goes with yeshiva every single year. The guys come in, they slowly get inspired, they slowly get, more from and whatnot. And there's like a certain system that you go through kind of every single year, I assume. So like, after doing it for 15 years, does it ever get, call it stale in a certain way? Or do you have the same fire and passion in the beginning of the year to have these guys over day one from year one versus, 15 years down the road?
I actually think it was something I was worried about early in my career. I wondered if there's like some sort of burnout that happens over time where Rebbe kind of just feels like it just becomes a broken record, like just over and over again, same thing. I have, Baruch Hashem, I'm not that old. It's 15 years. It's not 30, but right. I actually feel quite the opposite. I feel like every year that I'm zocha to perfect my craft even more, I feel like I'm able to influence in a positive way. I'm able to learn from, let's say, mistakes in previous years and, hone both in terms of like what my focus is and my skills and things like that, and my approach in chinuch in a way that I think over time I feel better about what I'm doing over time because I think I'm doing a better job year in, year out. I also think that the story of the Talmud is always changing. So, and the challenges of every generation is different. The challenges we were dealing with kids in 2010 were a little different than the ones we're dealing with in 2024. And ultimately, at the end of the day, while the Torah is always developing and the Torah is always very alive, I learned that from my Rebbe, Rav Parnas, Shlita, should be well, that even if he had taught the same Masechta several times over, he always looked at the Masechta with like a completely new set of eyes. He almost didn't. I was zocha to go through 2 rounds with him. The second round, we had done Gittin the second time. And I had notes from my previous Gilgal going over, Gittin with him. And he's like, he didn't want to hear what he had said previously because like this was, sometimes he would call me and say, Glanz, what did I say last year? What did I say last time around? But he really looked at the Gemara with fresh eyes and he gave that to us. And I really come in and I give the same tefillah shir every year. But every year it's a new group of guys coming in. It's a whole different, it's an experience. It's a growth experience. It's a process in Gemara. And so I feel like it brings me to life even more and more every year.
I couldn't help but, notice what you said a second ago, that it's a different ball game from 2010 to 2024 of chinuch. So in your eyes, what would you say is the biggest, whether it's a realization, a shift in your approach that you've had to take, and also what guys go through and kind of the chinuch process as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the most obvious one, which I'm sure everyone says, is technology. Technology is a real challenge. I'll quote the Mash in Neve. Once I was driving with him, I used to live in Telstone, as I mentioned. Once I was driving with him to a I believe it was a bris. It was some sort of simcha, and he said to me that back in the day, I'm going to say it the way he said it because you have to Neve, but like back in the day, those guys would party and do whatever they did. Let's just say would do whatever they did, and eventually, a month or 2 months in, they would get bored. And they would say, what's this base medrash about? And they'd walk into the base medrash, see what's going on. Because today, with the technology, the kids can be in their dorm rooms all day and be completely entertained. And they never have to come out and they never have to wonder what's going on. So that's certainly one challenge that we have in our generation, navigating that technology piece. I also think that I don't know if it's because we were less in tuned with it, but I think also on a mental health level, I think we're dealing with many more challenges today. I don't know if it's because there are more. I'm not a therapist, I can't tell you, but like if there are more, or if it's because It's just we're more aware of it and we speak about it more, but we're dealing much more with the mental health challenges. In yeshiva, I think if I was in yeshiva in 2010, 2011, if you ever told me we'd have a therapist on staff, I would tell you like, well, it's yeshiva. We don't have therapists, but like we have therapists on staff, and it's important. And I see that the guys need it because they're not just growing in Torah. Growing in Torah doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the person. And if the person's, so to speak, struggling, so how could his Torah thrive? So it makes sense. It's not like, but I think, I'm not sure, but I think it's a new realization that we have, that you have to work on the person, not just the Torah.
Kind of talking about Talmidim and the transitions that they've gone through years 2010 to 2014. Now I kind of want to focus on the topic of this episode, which is a kesher with a Rebbe. And I feel like
I need a Rebbe.
By the way, we're gonna talk about that video in a second and how that came to be. But for kids that come from typical non-Orthodox high schools who come into yeshiva, and even girls in seminary, but mostly guys in yeshiva, the idea of a kesher with a Rebbe, it's a faint thing that most people hear about. They're like, okay, you grow close to the rabbi. What does that actually mean? But from being in Mevaseret for so many years and working with kids that come in day one, who I've seen this so many times where a kid comes in and they're like, hey, rabbi, like, what's your name? Like the little bit of lack of kavod and the lack of understanding of what the importance of a kesher with a Rebbe is. But what would you say in terms of guys that come in are the hesitations that they may go through or common things that people struggle with to begin to break the ice to start a kesher with a Rebbe? What would you say that you've seen?
Yeah, I think guys come in. I remember I used to give a vod on Tuesday nights in yeshiva, and in the first vod is like, they would come over to your house. Some guys would be assigned to you to come over to your house. You make some food. It's like bayit cham, And in the beginning of the year, I'd always do the same vod. I'd always do the same lesson. I'd give them each a piece of paper and a pen, and I would say, it's the last day of the year, right now. What are 5 things that you regret that you did not accomplish this year? Like on the first day I told them this.
Wow.
So I want you, it's a stronger way of saying what are your 5 goals for the year. Every single guy writes on that paper, a kesher with the Rebbe. A kesher with the Rebbe. So it's a funny thing that they come in really wanting, thinking, and knowing that they want a kesher with the Rebbe. And I think, sometimes I wonder, so you had a Rebbe throughout all of you had a Rebbeim all throughout elementary school, all throughout high school. Like what's the difference? And I think, and I'll say the same thing, guys ask me about my tefillah shir. Why didn't I learn this in high school? I think the answer is the same. You have to be ready for it. And I don't think it's a difference in the Rebbeim. I think they're amazing Rebbeim in America, in high schools. I think there's amazing classes, but there's a certain maturity and readiness and preparedness that guys have when they come to Israel. So they're ready for that kesher with the Rebbe, not because they want to kesher with the Rebbe per se, because they realize I need to get to a more elevated place, and I can't do that on my own, and I need somebody to help guide me there. When you have no goal to get anywhere, you don't need anybody. It's only when you realize that you need to get somewhere do you realize you need help to get there. And so therefore they look to Rebbeim. And what you mentioned before about guys kind of the awkward beginning, they know they want a Rebbe, but they don't exactly know what they want, and there's that kavod kind of is not there. I think that has much less to do with the fact that they have a lack of kavod for Rebbeim, to more that they don't know what a kesher with a Rebbe is, and they're not yet holding in a place where they can appreciate that. So as they grow in their own growth, they begin to appreciate chashivas Torah. They end up appreciating more what the Rebbe's doing for them, what the Rebbe means to them, and over time, it's really a reflection of their own growth.
We'll be right back to today's episode with Rebbe Glanz, but first, I want to talk a little bit about a custom suit business that I actually created with a good friend of mine who is also a Mevaseret alumni, Aaron Tuckman. Noble Custom Suits was created by us about a year ago with the idea in mind of putting the client first. Bottom line, with every single thing that we do, we come to your house, we come to your office. I run the branch here in Eretz Yisrael, from Yerushalayim to Ramat Beit Shemesh to wherever it may be, and we also actually go into yeshivas to do custom fittings for students. And if you are in New York, New Jersey, and you want to learn more about Noble Custom Suits, go to noblecustomsuits.com, as you guys can see here on the screen. And we look forward to being in touch with you guys soon and hopefully stepping up your Shabbos wardrobe, your Yom Tov wardrobe, or whatever that may be. Looking forward to seeing you guys soon. And it's time to get right back to today's episode with Rebbe Glanz. So you talk about, as you're saying right now, that a lot of guys don't know necessarily what a kesher with a Rebbe is. So for even myself and for people that listen to this, like, what does a kesher with a Rebbe mean in your eyes?
Yeah. So in my eyes, it's, to a certain extent, it's a balance. A kesher with a Rebbe is not a friend. This is not a friend relationship. It's not a friendly relationship, in my mind. At least that's not how I conduct myself with my Talmidim. And I don't think most Rebbeim do. I think that, to a large extent, a kesher with a Rebbe is whatever it is that you need it to be, and that Rebbe can provide for you. Guys come in with a certain expectation, and I want to dispel it because I think sometimes it could happen, but many times it's kind of a faulty, it's a faulty assumption, and it could really lead a person to feeling a sense of failure, where they're looking almost like when you're looking for a shidduch. So you're looking for the perfect match, the perfect girl who understands me in every way. And they look for that in a Rebbe. But the reality is that you don't necessarily need that kind of kesher with a Rebbe who gets you in every single way, completely. He's your Ian Rebbe, he's your Bekias Rebbe, he's your Musar Rebbe, he's your life Rebbe, he's your everything Rebbe. And the reality is that while when most people think about a kesher with a Rebbe, they think about a Rebbe who's going to guide me in derech hachayim, in a way of life. But really, a kesher with a Rebbe is much more dynamic than that. And it could be that I can connect in a kesher with a Rebbe in terms of learning. And I can have another Rebbe in terms of schmoozing. And I can have another Rebbe that I look up to in terms of, his knowledge of halacha. And so a kesher with the Rebbe, I think, isn't this sort of set thing that here's what the Talmud is, here's what the Rebbe is, and this is how they connect. I think it's very dependent on what the Talmud needs, what he's looking for, and how that Rebbe can provide it for him. And so that's why you have multiple guys come to a yeshiva, and these Talmidim connect to this Rebbe, and these Talmidim connect to that Rebbe. Either they vibe with their personality, or they agree, they like their hashkafa, or they like their shiurim, and there's nothing wrong with that. Every Talmid has to sort of look for what it is that he needs, and for the Rebbe that will help him get to where he needs to go.
It was interesting because before we started this episode, I was talking with my wife Yali, and we were talking about the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that says, "Asay lecha rav." You make a rav for yourself. Now that's talking in the singular context, right? So talking about what you just said of, this kid finds a Rebbe that, relates to him in this area and that area. Kind of talk about the idea of maybe call it Reby shopping, where, do you think a kid who, let's say, goes to yeshiva, he's like, okay, I like this Rebbe, I like that Rebbe, so I want to keep a kesher with both of them. And maybe could I pick this Rebbe to go to for my halachic shilas? Could I go to this Rebbe for my hashkafic shilas? And do you think someone can have multiple Rebbeim for different things, essentially, they need?
Yeah. I always like to say, when people say this, I say l'cha rav. I also say it says k'nei l'cha chaver, but as far as I know, most people have more than one friend. It's yes, a person should have a Rebbe. But I do think, I personally don't see, maybe I'm biased, I don't see a steer at all. I pride myself on the fact that I have so many Rebbeim, although I will make the following distinction. I have Rebbeim for different things. And so if I have a halachic shaila, I won't go shopping around to my 5 Rebbeim, all asking them the same halachic shaila. If I have a shaila on life, I won't go around talking to all 5 Rebbeim about the same shaila on life. I have a Rebbe, I'm thinking of Rav Shimon Lawrence from Staten Island, who knows me from when I was a teenager, who understands me in a way that no one understands me. And when I want to go to him about something life-oriented, something that requires a knowledge of my history, so I will go to him. I'll also go to him for other things, but I'll go to him. When I think of hashkafa, when I developed hashkafically, I had a Rebbe, Rav Mendel Kessin, who was my Rebbe in hashkafa, and who really, I think, to a large extent, was makar of me. And so I have him for that. I have my Rebbe in Gemara, who I adore, And if I could say that about my Rebbe, I just absolutely am blown away by him. He's just such a malchus, Rav Yehuda Parnas Shlita, he should be well. And I looked to him, and he was my Rebbe. He was my Rebbe for learning. He was my Rebbe for Gemara. He was my Rebbe. But on the other hand, for Hashkafa, I connect now much more to like Rav Meyer. Rav Meyer Morgenstern, I'm very connected to in that way. You put Rav Parnas and Rav Meyer Morgenstern in the same sentence to say, what's wrong with you? It's like two totally different worlds. But for a person, most people are dynamic. And they have different ways to I should disqualify my Rebbe in Gemara because he doesn't share the same derech hachayim or whatever it is, or approach in hashkafa as I do. Why should I make that? I think that we are more dynamic than that. And so therefore, yes, if someone has one Rebbe that they feel that they connect to in every way, and they have that one person that they draw from only, and they don't need anybody else. Mamish aseh l'charav, that's amazing, that's great. But I see nothing wrong with the other model. I think, in fact, for the average person, that's the way it should be. But I would say that whatever Inyan you're connected to that Rebbe on, you can't shop in the sense that, I like what you're saying now, but I don't like what you're saying tomorrow, so now I'm going to go to somebody else. You have to, it's a relationship. And that's also what a kesher is that, it's a relationship. It's to a certain extent, you're committed to each other in that way, I think, and you have to stay loyal.
So on the topic of staying loyal, I think, I kind of want to delve a little bit deeper into that, but I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, where you have a Rebbe, you go to him for halachic shaila, and he tells you an answer, and sometimes it's hard to hear the answer because you're like, do I really want to, go by that? And then, as you talked about before, like Reby shopping, how you don't want to necessarily go one Rebbe to another Rebbe. Like, what's your advice to somebody who is like, okay, this is my Rebbe that I go to for halachic questions, and he tells me something that maybe I don't want to necessarily hear and actually follow? And what would you tell that person of like, you know what, no need to go run off, don't go Rebbe shopping? Like, what's your advice for that?
Yeah, I do think that it's important. Let me just say, I'm not a posek. So I can't comment on what it takes to be a posek. But I will say, in my experience, my own personal experience, it's helpful to have a Rebbe who you go to halachic shaylos who knows you. And the reason I think that that's important is, as we know in halacha, there is a factor of knowing the person. And when you know the person, sometimes you know that with this person, I need to be lenient on this Indian. I've learned this a lot from one of my Rebbeim who I go to a lot for psak. I remember I once went to him for a certain shaila I had, and he told me aser. Now, it's a funny thing about being, a Rav is that a little halacha. So I knew that there was what to be lenient on. So I asked my Rebbe, like, but there are mekilim in this area. He says, right, but not for you. In other words, he knew me, and he was demanding of me a little bit of a higher level. He was asking and requiring of me a little. So I think it's helpful to know, to develop a kesher to a certain extent with the posek that you go to. That gives you the sort of confidence that he's really guiding you, because psak halacha is guiding someone. It's guiding someone in the right way. And so I think I once heard Rav Shechter talk about this, and I'm not going to quote him per se, because a lot of people quote big people and they quote them incorrectly, but he was speaking about the idea that people go to halachic shaylos from like Gedolei Hadar, and they go, instead of going to their local Rav in their community, they go to the Gadol Hadar. And he was like against that idea, like you don't go to the Gadol Hadar for psak halacha, you go to your Rav. And I think it's sort of that same idea, like this is my Rav, this is the Rav I connect to, this is the Rav that knows me, this is the Rav that understands, as a mahalach in the community, and I kind of have to be committed to that, and I can't go shopping around because, there's no question the Gadol Hadar might be a greater Rav, but like there's a certain level of that this is my Rav, and this is the Rav that gets me, and this is the Rav. So, and I think it's true for Eitz as well. Obviously, I think Eitz is for advice. It's definitely true.
It's interesting. I kind of want to touch on what you just said a second ago of like, you have big Gedolim, Baruch Hashem, and you also have the Rebbeim that are, let's say, your Rebbe. So the way I see it is like, okay, if you have a Shiloh that might be relevant to you, and you have the ability to ask a Rebbe that's called more with it, who knows what's going on in the times and stuff like that, versus a Rav a Rav Shechter level or higher, whatever it may be, who has a much greater knowledge of, let's say, halacha or anything in Yiddishkeit, but is not necessarily as with the times. How does somebody find a balance of like, okay, like this Shiloh, that's for the big leagues, like that I go to the highest people possible, or versus, let me ask a Rav that's call it more with it, that would probably give me a more well-rounded or a more understanding answer.
So I would just, I'm not going to sidestep the question, but I'm going to just, the way I see it is if I have a Rav in Psak Halacha, I will go to that Rav and I will let that Rav tell me that this is something that's out of my league. And it's actually happened once or twice where I've gone to my posek for a certain shaila, and it happens to be that the person that he goes to is Rav Reuven Feinstein. So he would then himself, on his own volition, say, you know what, I want to look into this more. I need to speak to my Rebbe, or whoever it is, I don't know if it's his Rebbe, but someone he consults with, Rav Reuven Feinstein Shlita. So again, if you want to go to Gedolim to ask them shilas, I think because it's cool, to go ask Gedolim shilas and things like that. That's and hear their opinions and whatever it is. But I don't think that's, again, I'm not a posek, but I don't think that's how Psak Halacha should work. I think it should work that you have a Rav and you go to that Rav for your shilas.
So as we were just talking about a second ago of bigger Rabbanim and bigger Gedolim, and as what we touched on in the beginning when we talked about Akesh with Rebbe, there's a certain aspect of kavod which is very important. And when it comes to boundaries, let's just say with a Talmud and a Rebbe, whether you're a student in yeshiva or whether you're someone well after your years in Eretz Yisrael, what's your advice of somebody of like, okay, here's a proper boundary of like, your Rebbe's not your friend, as you said before, but he's somebody to look up to. But then there's also like, it's hard for some people, right? So like, what's your advice for someone about, let's say, kavod a Rav?
Yeah. So going back, going to date myself a little bit, but going back to my day, we had no such struggle with this. And the reason we had no such struggle with this is that the Rebbe-Talmid relationship was so clearly not beyond, to a certain extent, formality. And if you connected to a Rebbe, you connected because he said inspiring things, or you had conversations with him. There was no playing basketball with your Rebbe. None of my Rebbeim played basketball with me. There was no rapping Rebbeim. There was no sort of horsing around kind of thing. And we can sit here and debate whether that's good or bad. But as I said, times change and the needs potentially change. Our generation, to a certain extent, and I think we need it, the way the Rebbeim connect and the way the guys connect is they have to sort of bring themselves to a place where the guys feel that they can connect to them and relate to them. And so I think that that's important. And I think that that's, to a certain extent, what allows the Talmidim to open up and to accept what the Rebbe says. Now, there's nothing wrong with a Rebbe who still wants to just completely stay up here and there are Rebbeim like that, and that's great, and there's a place for that. But I think it's also fair, there's a place for Rebbeim to be more with it and more relatable. However, and there's a big however, there's a line. And that line is a very important line to keep, because ultimately, if there isn't proper kavod for the Rebbe, and the Rebbe doesn't demand by asking for it, demands it by being it, and in terms of who he is and his relationship with the guys, demands a certain level of kavod, he's not doing the Talmud a service. The Talmud needs to develop and look up to his Rebbe and have kavod a Rav. And so that's a very important thing. I'll just reference a story. And I learned this from my father. My father is yes, he does have smicha. He got smicha later in life. But my father, I have a background in martial arts. My father is a high-level black belt. And I was also in that field. And when I was younger. And my father, I remember, my father was a sensei. He was a sensei. He was a sensei as a teacher in karate. And there was one of the students in the class, and you referred to him as sensei, that walked over to him and started calling him by his first name. It was like buddy, like they were around the same age and whatever it is. And my father listened to him, whatever it is. My father looked at him and looked at him straight in the face. And he said to him, if you ever call me by my first name again in class, and don't refer to me as sensei, don't ever walk back in here. Shame on you. And the guy walked away. And I remember I went back in the car and I was sitting with my dad, and my dad turned to me and he's like, I did that for him. I did that for him. He needed that. And so I learned something from that. Like, we need that balance with our Talmidim for their sake. It's not a covet thing. It should be a covet thing, honestly. The Rebbeim deserve covet. But it's not a covet thing. It's chashuv for the Talmud to have covet for the Rebbe. It's for their own growth. But it shouldn't be so much so that they're afraid to communicate and afraid to approach. There's a balance. And I think in our generation, if to a certain extent, for a Rebbe to be relatable, he has to make himself relatable. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that or puzzle about that.
So this is a part of this topic that I'm very curious to hear what you're going to say, that from the Rebbe's perspective, because we've been talking up until now of like the Talmud's perspective, but from your perspective of things, like, how do you find a proper balance of like, okay, I'm the Rebbe level, of course, because you have to understand your role. But then it's like, I'm relatable enough for the guys without maximizing on let's say, my fundamental beliefs in Yiddishkeit and whatnot. And, the times are getting very crazy in the world with technology, with a lot of things out there that you try to stay away from a little bit. So how do you find that balance as a Rebbe on the other side of the relationship for yourself?
You're saying in terms of how do I find the balance in terms of
being relatable and feeling like, I'm doing my proper job as being like the Rebbe of a kid.
Yeah. So I very much try not to make the relationship about me. And I'm cognizant of that. I try as much as possible to check my preconceived notions in my view of the world at the door. And I try to be there for the Talmud. I don't talk about myself with the Talmud unless I feel that talking about something about my history will help the Talmud be able to realize something about himself or to be able to relate to something the Talmud says. I try as much as possible not to make the relationship about me. It is completely natural for every person to want to get something out of a relationship. And I think what I get out of the relationship with the Talmidim is the ability to help them. But I try as much as possible not to make it about my needs. And I work on that. And I think it's a chashuv thing to do, because I think if we don't, it's a slippery slope.
I really, really hear that. And I'm very curious to hear that, like, in your mind, when it comes to the kasher with a kid, you're giving and giving and giving. And as much as it's not about you, like, after doing it for so many years, like, is it ever hard that you just like keep giving? And like, what would you say if you had to categorize the best and most rewarding parts of being a Rebbe versus what are some of the challenging aspects of giving so much of your time to these Talmidim?
Yeah. So giving is not hard. I think for me, I think giving is just hard, that you sometimes have just physical exhaustion, as you can hear in my voice. Giving shiurim all day and talking to Talmidim and whatever it is, like, eventually you just actually physically get exhausted, and that's real. And but in terms of giving in and of itself, I think that for me personally, and I'm sure I could speak for many of the Rebbeim, you have to. I'm filling myself up and then giving. So I'm not just giving on empty. It's not just giving the same things. When I'm going to give a shiur, I'm learning. So when I'm learning, I'm developing, and then I'm giving. So it's part of a growth process for me as well. When I'm developing a shmooze or hashkafik shiur, I'm talking to the Talmidim, but I'm really talking to myself. I'm really talking about things that I'm passionate about and that I want to spread because I myself am either dealing with or struggling with, and so that's how I deal personally with the growth. I don't feel like it's this or that. I feel that the things that I'm giving is part of the growth process that I'm in. And it actually, you've seen it in a funny way. If I look at myself over time, I see that the kind of topics that I'm teaching and how I'm teaching is highly reflective of me. Like, thinking about my early days, I was very big into Jewish philosophy. I was very big into like, well, how do we know Judaism is true and all those kinds of things. And that's where I was at in terms of my growth and development. That's what I was excited about. So I would give a lot of these shiurim, science versus religion, things like that. And that's what my night Seder, and like I was very passionate about that, excited about that. I cannot don't talk about that today. I don't talk about that today. I just don't. Why don't I talk about it today? I'm not passionate about it anymore, really. And I'm more passionate now, and I actually think I said the guys need it more, is I also talk more about, their connection. It's more about their connection to Hashem, their connection to themselves, their connection to their Judaism, their connection to their relationships and their connection to Torah. Like, that's what it's more about for me today. And maybe that's also because where I'm holding, but also where I think they can also grow the most. So I don't talk about that other stuff. Not that it can't be talked about, not that it's not necessary. And sometimes in my tefillah shir, I'll kind of go off tangent and I'll start talking about some Einstein theory or relative to like science. They're like, where did that come from? Because that's what I used to do. I used to love that stuff, but I'm just less passionate about that stuff today.
I can't help but think a lot throughout this conversation of like being relatable and like being with the guys and the importance of that kesher. And I have to address the elephant in the room when there's no elephant in the room, but last year, the video that came out, I Need a Rebbe. I hope everybody watching this video knows. I'll probably put a clip somewhere in the beginning of this podcast about it, just so people see if they don't know. But like, take me through what that was like for you when you were approached with the idea of the song, and then the messages that were put through it, because there's a lot of chachma behind it in terms of what was given over and how it was given over, and what was that like from when the video was produced to how it just blew up, and what did that do for you at that point?
It was kind of a perfect storm. Every year in yeshiva, on Purim's coming up, on Purim, I get up in front of the yeshiva and I freestyle rap and rip on all the kids. That's what I do. That's what I do on Purim, every the night. I used to do it off the cuff. Then I realized that maybe I shouldn't do it off the cuff because sometimes I could say things that rip on the wrong guy in the wrong way. So now I think about it in advance. But usually that's what I did. One year, I was approached about doing a fun Purim rap video. My name is Rebbe Glanz. And it's called My Name is Rebbe Glanz 2.0. I'm not going to go into that whole
epic
thing,
song, by the way. Check it out on YouTube.
So I did it as a Purim shtick. Instead of that, you're ripping on guys, we made a video of My Name is Rebbe Glanz. The whole thing's shtick. It's just, it's good. It was all meant for Purim shtick, and it was not meant to leave the yeshiva. It was not really designed. It was like we designed it for the yeshiva. It was not really meant to like leave the boundaries of the yeshiva. Really, I didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And then that started going. At the same exact time, there was a Shana Aleph kid that year, Binyamin Werner, who himself has his rap career or whatever it is he does. He's a Jewish rapper, I guess you call him, and he was a Talmid in the yeshiva. And we constantly were talking between the two of us. He would always come over to me and Chepim. He's like, we got to do something together. And then in his Shana Bet, he said something to me. I said something to him, and I said to him, I'm like, listen, let's sit down and let's see if we can come up with anything constructive. I'm not interested in just putting on another rap video for the sake of putting up a rap video. Let's see if we can do something, if we can figure something out. And we sat in the office together, like mamish like the video. Like the two of us sat together in the office, and I don't remember if it was him or me who said it first. Doesn't matter. We said it together, and we realized like, hey, listen, I'm a Rebbe, you're a Talmid. Let's try to capture this relationship. And we gave Pinsker a call and Simchon a call. Pinsker was the vocalist, and the one who did the chorus. He's the one who made the music, and he produced the beat. And we kind of split it up between the two of us. He'll be the Talmid, he'll go first, and then I'll be the Rebbe to be reassuring. And we planned it out to try to really capture the Rebbe-Talmid relationship in the most general sense, in the most special sense. And I think that it struck a chord because people really were able to connect to it. And that's something that they either appreciate that they have or something that they're striving for and want. And I think the song did a wonderful job of capturing that. And I'm glad I was able to be a part of that.
But I think by now, by the way, there's probably like 2 or 3 million views on that video. But what was it like once that video was put out there? And then like I knew everybody knows that video, but like, what was that like for you? Like in terms of the feedback that you got from people, just like how geschmack was that for you?
So I, as opposed to the My Name is Rebbe Glandz video, which I was completely shocked that left the walls of the yeshiva and that anyone thought, that was, I don't know, good, but like that I got some positive feedback about that. This one, from the moment I heard, Yehuda Pinsker produce the beat, and I remember where I was. I was doing a Kivrei Tzadikim Tiyul for the Mevaseret guys, the alumni, and I was doing a Kivrei Tzadikim Tiyul, and Yehuda Pinsker was on the Tiyul, and he sends me a WhatsApp with the beat. As soon as I heard the beat in the chorus, I knew it was going to be big. I knew, as soon as I heard it, I said, it's such a beautiful chorus. He's such a great voice, and like it's such a good beat. And I knew Binyamin's talents, and I knew what I could do with it. I was obviously everything siyata d'shmaya, but I knew it was going to be successful. And I also knew that the topic we were speaking about was a topic people were passionate about. So I wasn't surprised that it took off. But naturally, I had never experienced that before, so it was new for me, and it was funny for me to like now sort of be referenced in that way, because that's so not me, like I'm not like a well-known like Rebbe in that way, and like I'm local, I'm in Mevaseret, whatever it is, and like suddenly like I kind of got thrown on the global stage, and that was a interesting experience. Do
you think that video, by the way, put not to say Mevaseret on the map, but like you think that it helped entice more guys to potentially want to come to yeshiva?
I can't take credit for Mevaseret Success. Mevaseret is a massive amount of talent there and so much energies that go into it. It's well beyond one video. But I think it was the right place at the right time for the yeshiva. And one of the things that Mevaseret prides itself on, and I'm sure all institutions do, but something that we really pride ourselves on is kesher with the Rebbe-Talmid. We have incredibly passionate, all-star team of Rebbeim. And when the guys leave the yeshiva, they really feel that that's what they got out of Mevaseret in one capacity or another. The ability to use the song in the video to highlight the Rebbeim, which is what we do, and to show that kesher, not just of me, but like of all the Rebbeim, Rav Berg and Rav Steinitz and Rav Ben, and all of them are Shiva, like Rav Herschel, like all and so much more. Those are just a sampling of the amazing Rebbeim that we have. To be able to showcase that was enjoyable for me to be able to do. I felt like I was able to give back to the yeshiva, and they deserve it. They earned it, and they deserve the spotlight not because of my song. They deserve the spotlight because they're really doing the work.
That's amazing. One thing that I'm thinking about right now, as you talk about the alumni that were involved in this video, for somebody that went to yeshiva, lav davka Mevaseret guys, but like they went to yeshiva a bunch of years ago, and they might have left yeshiva with not a Rebbe that they felt like that was my Rebbe, and maybe they're years out of yeshiva and they don't have somebody that's like that's my Rebbe. Sometimes if they have a thought in their mind of like, should I reach out to a rabbi? They're probably like, no, it's been so many years, he doesn't want to hear from me. But like, what's your advice to somebody that's listening to this, no matter where they're at in life, and they're questioning like, do I need a Rebbe? Should I reach out to that rabbi from 5, 10, 15 years ago in yeshiva? Like, what would your advice be to someone?
So my advice would be twofold. Number one, a connection to a Rebbe doesn't have to be a connection to a Rebbe in Israel. I'm a big believer that you should try to make a kesher to a Rebbe wherever you are, and as much as possible, because that's the Rebbe that's going to be accessible to you. That's the Rebbe you're going to have, the potential to be able to go to easily. So, it goes back to what I said in the beginning about a Rebbe-Talmid relationship in Israel. You technically, and some guys do, many guys do today, a Rebbe-Talmid relationship before Israel and their high school Rebbeim or whatever it might be. And likewise afterwards, it shouldn't be limited to the Israel experience. So first of all, I'd recommend to that Talmud, go find a connection to a Rebbe in whatever way you can, wherever you are. That would be the first thing I would say. Or maybe you hear a shiur of a certain Rebbe and that particular Torah speaks to you, so go pursue it. Go pursue that influence. But I want to comment on what you said about the Rebbe in Israel. This just happened to me the other day, where a Talmud that I had spoken to in the longest time gave me a call. I was so excited to be able to speak to him. And it wasn't even a Talmud that I necessarily would say we were like the closest, but like he had a need and he felt I could help him, and he had the courage to just reach out to me. And it was so easy and such a great conversation, And I think all of the Rebbeim are there and excited. It's one of the hardest things for a Rebbe at the end of the year is after putting in, if you want to ask me what's the hardest thing about being a Rebbe, what's the hardest thing about being a Rebbe is after putting in all your kishkas and all your efforts into a guy, just watching a guy leave. It's always like, that's the hardest part. I feel like shul rabbis, community rabbis, things like that, like they get to be with their people, and they get to be with their talmidim, so to speak, for years and years and years. And we have this like window of opportunity of like a year or two, and then kind of like they move on. So anytime they reach out to us, it's such a thrill. It's such an awesome, thing.
Staying on the topic of like alumni and kids that went to the yeshiva, I kind of want to touch just a little bit for however long you want to kind of, I guess, plug La Vie Kol of what you do in the summer. But I know you've done a real amazing amount of work in the summers when you're not in Mevaseret with some of your alumni, with different kids that went to different yeshivas. So kind of like, I'm sure there are guys listening to this that have the ability to potentially come to spend the summer with you in La Vie Kol. So kind of take me through that and what you guys been able to do and what's your what would you say about that program that you got going on?
I love that program. I love the people there. Everything from the campers to the staff, from the top down. They're just so on board with what we're doing. And I never really had a taiva to work in a camp. I never had a desire. I went to camp for a few years myself. I went to Mosheva for a year. But I wasn't such a camp guy. I didn't really have a desire to go to camp. And frankly, I liked my summers off. Wasn't looking for a job. And the experience of Camp La Vie it's not a kollel. It's not like nothing wrong with a kollel. Camps that have kollels, wonderful. The kollel does its thing. They're learning schosim, like merit's unbelievable, great. It has an influence directly, indirectly. The fact that we have a kollel, that its whole purpose is to completely influence the camp and infuse it with Judaism. Whether it's the influences, at the end of the day, all of the kollel guys are counselors and sports staff, mostly counselors, and they're counselors for upper and lower teens. So the upper and lower teens in La Vie, their counselors, their role models are guys post yeshiva. Shana Aleph, and this year coming, we have a bunch of Shana Bet guys as well coming. And they're coming in with an opportunity. It's just to be examples for these kids, and these kids appreciate it so much. And the kollel is such a warm place where kids just want to hang out, and they just feel so happy to be there, and they're so happy that we're there. It's just such a positive environment, and I feel like we're giving so much to the camp, but we're also getting so much from them. And I'll quote, Benji Dan, Johnny Dan's older brother, who was in the camp. Dan. He was Johnny Dan, yeah. So he's in Mevaseret. So Benji Dan's older Benji Dan was in the kollel for the first year, and he was a counselor. He says, I came in thinking about how much learning am I going to get done, and how's my growth going to be, and this and that. I'm like, okay, I have to do this annoying counselor job. But he said it was such an unbelievable fusion that at the end he was more excited about the counselor job. It wasn't a job. It was like being a Rebbe. It really was. Get to bring the kids in, hang out in the kollel with them, talk to them about important things. And the camp is such a closed environment that it gives you a really special connection. It's not just a connection of friendship. It's like Kiruv 101, but it's not classic Kiruv. It's Kiruv of, it's Kiruv of closeness and relationship and leading by example. And so I just feel that the guys that come to the camp, we just had a get together today of the Mevaseret guys, the 7 guys, Kananahar, that are coming to the camp, and just so much positive energy and excitement to give, and we receive so much. It's really just a very full summer and a full program. So I initially did the program for a year, thinking I'll try it, but I'm thrilled by what we're doing over there with the opportunity that we have.
So after speaking so much about your Talmidim and the kesher that you have with them, the one final question that I kind of have for you is, anybody that's listening to this, whether you are a Mevaseret alum, whether you are somebody that went to any other yeshiva, if you had one, call it thing, or as my wife Yali phrases it better than I do, like a message in a bottle that you gave to each person, and you said, take this with you wherever you go. It could be a general klal about Yiddishkeit or anything. What would that be, and what will you leave them with?
Again, I don't know if it's the most important message, but it's very me. It's what I try to give over. We talk about Rebbe-Talmid relationship. why is it important to have a Rebbe-Talmid relationship? Because growth is dynamic. And so it's not this just like stagnant thing that I do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then I get to where I need to go. For every person, it's different. There are ups and downs and stages in life. It's like any relationship, that's how it is. And the Rebbe-Talmid relationship is really a relationship helping you navigate your life. But in truth, that's what all of Yiddishkeit is about, and that's what connection to Hashem is. And so I would say, never let your Yiddishkeit and your connection to Hashem grow stagnant and stale. Don't just be the person who, goes to the minyan and goes to the shiur and just does the things kind of like robotically and automatically. That's the spot part of me coming out. Like, you have to try to infuse energy and get excitement out of what it is that you do. Now, I can't give any generic advice how to do that, because for every person it's different. Speak to your Rebbe. But but I do think that one of the dangers, one of the things that happens when a kid leaves yeshiva, and it's normal to a certain extent, that they perhaps in yeshiva felt so excited and passionate and everything was new, and then they kind of just chug ahead, and that's normal. And to a certain extent, you're on cruise control, and you're moving, and that's good. But you have to always be pushing yourself. Rabbi Nachman always talks about this idea about he would start. In Sichas Arani, he talks about how he would start mechodash, from new, every single day, multiple times a day. And like when you read it, you're like, well, what was he doing every day that he had to fall and kept on getting himself up? But like, it's this mahalach of like always pushing yourself passionately to new heights and be excited. Don't just go on autopilot. So that would really be, my one message. Always, just because you haven't been doing something up until now, you haven't had that kesher, you haven't had that experience, keep your minds open. I always talk about this in Tzfat. Guys come in, they look at it like this, like, do I vibe with this place? Or, open yourself up. So you don't have to become a Tzfati to appreciate Tzfat. Open yourself up, experience something new, explore a new dimension of yourself. And I think that's true in our relationship with Hashem. Be passionate, be excited, and explore.
Wow. I'm amazed, by the way, of just how much knowledge you've had from being in this field for so many years, rightfully so. And just, I want to give you, a big ashur again for taking the time to come. And this was an absolute pleasure to kind of get a little bit of a Pesach into your mind and how you think. And just really, thank you so much for coming. And hopefully we'll have you back again soon.
Same. It was a real pleasure to be here. It was great. Thank you.
That is a wrap, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. I just want to touch on one little nakuda that I think is a very valuable lesson to take from what Rabbi Glanz just said, is that no matter where you are at in life, having a kesher with a Rebbe could do so much for you. And that if you might not have a kesher with a Rebbe and you're like, should I reach out to that rabbi in yeshiva that I was close with a bunch of years ago? Just do it. Why not? It could add so much, and hopefully you could develop a kesher again with a Rebbe and keep it going for a long time. So thank you guys so much for watching today's episode, and looking forward to seeing you guys next Sunday.